Welcome to Wildcraft 9. On this week's episode, I'm going to be presenting a talk I gave on how to be sustainable and targeted in your efforts to diversify your space. And the space I'm going to be talking about is historical cosplay. These are groups that get together that recreate different periods of history. Now, more specifically, the historical recreation group I belong to is called the SCA, which stands for the Society of Creative Anachronism. You can find out information at sca.org. But I'm hoping that some of these principles are going to go across the board to other groups as well. If you are a person trying to make your spaces more diverse, maybe this talk can help. Thanks so much. Okay, I'm just going to start. I was asked by the organizers, which was very kind of them, if I could come and talk about being an ally. And I first envisioned this talk about being why we should strive to support others and why that matters. And throughout putting it together, I realized it's not really about that. It's really about how we're going to target and sustain our efforts as allies. I've been as an ally, as many of us have been active for years. There's times I've been knocked on my butt by doing the wrong thing or being sort of naive in some spaces. And so I've put some things into this presentation that I'm hoping might save some heartache. You're welcome to take what you can from this. And if anything bothers you or you want to talk about it, let's chat about it at the end. There'll be a time where we'll stop the recording and then we can just ask questions and you're not being recorded. And so I'm going to start. Here we go. So the first thing I want to talk about is who is the space for that we're creating today. And this is specifically for allies. Often when we're talking about allyship, we're talking about, leaning back and giving space to other people and centering others and uplifting. But in this space, we're building space for allies. And in all the ways that matters, in all the ways that can also be problematic. We're going to talk about that later. So take up space. If you're here to learn how to be an ally, take up some space, ask questions. That would be great. And we can have a lively discussion at the end. In terms of what we're going to cover today, I'm going to talk about sort of myself. We're going to talk about some definitions, some advice, some challenges, and then an open discussion. And I want to talk about some of the visuals that are in this talk. I kind of chucked a bunch of photos because I need pictures and color to look at while I'm talking. And some of these are from an online bunch of panel discussions and talks we gave during lockdown. And this was a panel that was done in Canada, we call First Nations, but Indigenous players. So some of the visuals, if you're wondering where they came from, are from the panels that we gave. And I feel like it's okay to use them because we're just talking about allyship, which is a big part of sustaining diversity and other views and people and cultures in our spaces. So who am I in the SCA? I live in Ontario. I live in Vancouver, Canada. And I also lived in Drachenwald, when we lived in South Africa. And I actually did a reign in Drachenwald, which was interesting in some ways because it's probably the only kingdom in the world where you have countries that were historically at war with each other. And that plays into who supports who in terms of peerages and stuff. Like sometimes Swedes don't want to support Finnish, and sometimes the Finns don't want to support the Swedes and all of that stuff. So that kind of opened my eyes quite a bit to some of the nuances around. I'm also a fiber laurel. For me, I really want to focus on understanding what a diverse SCA could look like and why we're not there yet. So some of the stuff I talked about. So during lockdown, we created like an online regular broadcast, a conduit where we did panel discussions and talks. A lot of it was on inclusivity and understanding some of the challenges that some of our players face. And I definitely learned a lot and had to relearn some things and change some of my points of view. I support sort of expanded historical focus of the SCA, and some of those things is just working in some of the peerage spaces to help other peers who, a lot of older peers were made peers during a time when the SCA was very Western European focused, sort of very art theory and legend. and what's kind of problematic about that and how we can shift that. I also, with my friend Draven, co-created the SCA Indigenous Players and Supporters Group. And I also believe in building better infrastructure and policy to address areas of unsafety. So a couple of the things what I was involved in, at the time, we really just had a grievance procedure, which is not a trauma-informed process if you're dealing with harassment or bullying due to the power structures we have in the SCA. So we created a new bullying and harassment procedure so that people can understand if you are being bullied and harassed, who do you report to? What does a report look like? What is the process that follows? So sort of trying to create some transparency. And the other thing was co-created the first Kingdom DEI committee. So this is a committee. Now there's a B for belonging, but at the time we didn't have the B. A committee where we looked at sort of staffing a group of people from very diverse walks of life to help support seneschals and support the crowns when things come up, or just sort of creating conduit for better understanding, whether that's physical accessibility, mental health, racial inequality, all of these things that play into our spaces. And then outside the SCA, I'm a biologist, and I strictly these days, I just work with what we call in Canada First Nations. In America, you call Native Americans, we call them First Nations here, supporting their land management through their traditional knowledge. So I sort of help translate their traditional knowledge into working with regulators and how do we change policy to incorporate. So it's not science-based, it's more we call 2Y seeing. And then I also, as a fiber laurel and a dying laurel, has now grown, and I collaborate with First Nations artists to teach what we call 2Y seeing natural dye and weaving workshops. So the idea is that these are workshops based on the Western science side as a biologist, and then their traditional knowledge. And so and I'm usually doing that once or twice or more a month, which has sort of informed how I try and walk through this world. So when it comes to allyship, I think that there's really three legs of the stool of allyship. So one of them is creating tangible actions towards the right of a minority or targeted community without being a member of it. There's a saying that's come out of the Black community in the States, which is show me the receipts. These are the receipts. These are the things that you actively are doing or a part of to help move the needle on some of the challenges that we're facing. To move forward with purpose and thoughtfulness to create and improve our community spaces, and to create intentional relationships with others and find ways to care for others that are rooted in love, respect, and empathy. So this is leaning in. It's also listening. It's sort of actively trying to create positivity and connections. And I should say too, I was asked to teach this as an ally. It's not really a term I use. I have a friend, Draven, who's from Alberta, and he uses the term striving to support. And I like that a lot better. So I move forward striving to support other players. And I like it because if you're like, I'm an ally, and somebody doesn't want or need you as their ally, it can kind of knock you back a step. Whereas if you're striving to support and somebody doesn't really need or want your support, you just keep striving. You're like, great, I'm going to strive forward and find something else. It kind of keeps the momentum going. So that I like striving to support better than ally. A couple more terms. I think it's important to kind of lay out what we mean when we say a term. So one is intersectionality, which I know can be a bit of a buzz term, but it just means discrimination can be experienced differently based on overlapping identities. So all of us have these different components to us. I would also add like parenting or taking care of young children in here as well. We're all a mix of these things, and we are probably all allies. We all need allies, and people sort of can use allies as well, depending on where we fall in these things. And the other term is Eurocentric, which I think helps in the SCA because you see it a lot in sort of more innocent phrases, like you see it online. Oh, in period, this was done, and what they really mean is during medieval Europe, this was done. And I think we need to watch that because we're not being Eurocentric. In period could be any period before pre-1600. It can be a lot of continents and a lot of different cultures. And so the problem with being Eurocentric is it implies other identities are less important or meaningful. So I just think it's something to be aware of. You start seeing it a lot, and you're like, oh, it's not quite what we want. The other term is martyr, which is sort of self-sacrificing yourself to the detriment of yourself and others. Um, Sometimes as allies, we can work really hard, really quickly, and try and do a lot and burn out. And what it can sometimes mean is that the very people you're trying to support and become allies have to now put effort and work into supporting you. And you'll see that phrase, like, white people tears, this idea of taking up space, of being sort of needing emotional support, but really it's something to be avoided. And that's kind of one of the things I want to talk about in this talk, is how can we avoid sort of becoming that sort of stereotype of being a martyr. And one of the reasons is that our identities, like I said, are built across multiple spectrums. And I'm sure there's all ways that we could all use support as we go forward. And some of our language biases, I'm still seeing sort of old versus new world. And I think that this is something in the SCA I would love to just have us retire. It doesn't really make any sense. For example, for work this summer, I was in a little village called Kakatla up on the north coast of BC, and people have been in Kakatla for 10,000 years. So I think that's actually predates Rome. So how can this be the new world, right? There's people ancient everywhere. So that's something I'd like to see retired. This idea of targeted versus marginalized community. So the term marginalized community can mean communities that are pushed to the margins, but you'll see the term targeted. Sorry, I'm getting over a cold. If I'm a little bit raspy, I apologize. Targeted community is kind of sort of overtaking that term, because people in these communities can be targeted for harm or targeted for suppression or targeted for other ways. And I think it's more sort of recognized that this community is having harm placed upon it, versus that there is harm sort of within it. That was the image from our First Peoples talk. That was panel. It's probably my favorite panel. It was a really good one when we did the Lion's Den. So why is allyship important? Why should we do it? I think it's wrapped up in our PLQs, this idea of inspiring, educating, and empowering people. It's a part of our ideals in the SCA. I think it builds friendships and it fosters collaboration. I think it helps build good faith and volunteerism. Like, if people believe they're part of something and feel like they belong, they help build and working together. And I think that can be a real issue in the SCA, because everything we do is based on volunteerism. This idea of coming together and feeling like we're putting our faith in something real and something positive. I think that helps inspire all of us to want to invest in those spaces. And just pure the diversity in the SCA, like difference of cultures and ideas and research in arts and sciences. It just makes for more interesting spaces and online spaces too. We're looking at, like, in our kingdom, how to decolonize our arts and science competition. We have a very structured arts and science competition, but there's ways in which people can't really participate in some of the ways. And so looking at how we can adjust it. And I find that that's the kind of stuff that gets me really interested. Right, a second. So why is allyship hard to sustain? Some of us feel this like driving need to fix everything. Like, when you become aware of disparities in power and some of the stuff that has happened historically, like, it's just so awful. You're like, well, I'm gonna go forward. I'm gonna fix everything. It's gonna be great. And we know that science or silence is complacency. This idea that if we know sort of people are being suppressed, if you don't say anything, it doesn't help the people being suppressed. It helps the oppressor, right? But eventually you're just sort of pouring from this empty cup. And it can feel as an ally like you don't deserve to take up space and you don't sort of deserve support, that you have to sort of pour all your energy out. And then if that can be combined with also a misstep, let's say you misgender somebody, or you've done something that has caused socially some harm, it can be very distressing that you feel like you've really let yourself down. So I think I want to talk about a little bit about how we're going to sustain those efforts. One of them is I think we need to think strategically and geographically. Like if you're playing in the SCA and you want to be an ally, you should be aware what are the key issues within your region, in your kingdom, your barony, your shire. What are the things going on that you could be involved in to help change some of these things? Because they're going to be different in different parts of the world. And to be supportive of solutions, especially those proposed by people that are directly affected. So pay a special attention if people are saying, this is going on, I think this is how we can change it, giving that special consideration. Think critically about what is being proposed and by whom, and try to support having diverse people in leadership positions. Like, are your positions, are the leaders in your group very, very homogenous? That could be an issue because it creates a power structure where people are having to explain things up the chain, and things get lost and things are not prioritized in the way that they could be. But the other side of it is not relying on targeted communities to do the work. So somehow you've got to figure out how you can listen, how you can make sure that you're walking forward in good faith, and at the same time still trying to do some work. And I think one of the big things is taking advantage of opportunities to learn, which are being presented by targeted communities. So, for example, participating in this weekend, this was put on by, like it often can be, women of color. And here we have this opportunity, but there's also Voices of Color podcast. There's other opportunities that are being created. So take advantage of those. Number 2, avoid burnout. How are we going to avoid burnout? Think critically about who you want to focus on supporting. So, and then uncouple positivity and support from action. This idea that you want to create tangible action in your region and shared space, and be strategic on social media. So when it comes to social media, something to be aware of is one of the ways that Facebook functions, as an example, is it learns where you fit on the political spectrum, and then it purposely shows you content on other parts of that spectrum to try to annoy you, because if you're annoyed, you're going to stay. You're not going to turn it off. You're going to keep going. And there's times, I think, where you can get tripped up in putting a lot of energy and a lot of effort into online communication that isn't necessarily doing anyone any real good. So one of the terms we have in my work is called mechanism of interaction. And so one of the things I look for when I'm shown something that doesn't fit with my political beliefs and I'm just like got my back up is this information being shared in a space, in an SCA space? Like, is it being shared on an online forum? Could my friends be harmed through this? Like, do I need to step in here? And there's times where you kind of have to sit back and be like, I'm not going to swing at every pitch. It's too exhausting. It's not sustainable. So if you can, I would say just try, if you can, be strategic on social media. Not always possible. And wine can help, of course. And I think a big thing is thinking about, and this isn't easy, I'm not saying it's easy, is determining your allyship boundaries. So thinking about personally what inspires you. And so for me, I want everyone to be able to explore and celebrate their ancestry. Everybody in the SCA should be able to do that. I don't think everybody in the SCA can, and I think that they should. That's what keeps me motivated. And the other thing is people of color, especially Indigenous players, should feel safe and included at events. And if they aren't and they don't, that's a problem. That's a problem that motivates me and keeps me wanting to support the SCA being a better place. And determine what you have the energy for in terms of leading, and what can you just indirectly support and send messages of support. So you can't do everything. And your best ways to translate energy into action. I remember my dad was a lawyer growing up, and he quit as a senior partner. He quit and he joined the environmental movement full time. And he had this piece of advice, and I really hated it at the time. He said 2 things. He said, one is don't believe anything too much because people will start ignoring you, which I do understand what he was saying. Like, if you become rabid about something, people can tune you out. And the other thing he said is that you can't care about everything all the time. Like, you have to pick your spots. And I think that's where some of the most fundamental change happens, is in that targeted change. And we saw that if anyone went to the talk on inspirational equality and you saw how laser focused that movement was in terms of changing Kapora, that's why it was so effective. And be realistic with your bandwidth. Like for me, I have 3 small kids and a full-time job. So I know it is much easier for me to show up for things or do things online than it ever will be trying to rustle them into garb and taking them to an event and trying to teach something in person. So I sort of try to be realistic about what I can commit to. And for me, a lot of that's going to be doing stuff online. Okay, let me tell you about this slide. And I don't know now why I have tablet weaving because there's absolutely nothing to do with tablet weaving. But I got kind of knocked on my ass last year is as I was trying to be a good ally and I realized I got myself in trouble, that I was being abused financially and emotionally and professionally. And it was distressing enough that I actually thought about not even giving this talk. But I realized that that's just not a useful way to think, that I would much rather work through it and came out with some advice, because this is the part of allyship we don't talk about, and I think that we need to. So part of allyship is learning about each other and wanting to invest in actions towards a better world. And another part is acknowledging disparity in opportunities and the historical suppression and ridicule of non-European cultures. So together, some of us find that highly motivating to lean into opportunities to support people from targeted communities. But societies and communities have wide ranges of people, and there will always be people who are predisposed to using goodwill for their own means. And this can lead to allies being in situations where they're being emotionally or financially abused, and they realize it and they just thought, okay, how do I get myself out of this situation? And that's a part of the allyship model that we haven't really resolved. And it can be very distressing. So what can you do? How do you get yourself out of a situation without causing harm? And you certainly don't want to cause harm to the communities you are yourself trying to support. Oh, and I should say, like an example of this could be, you have a person that you're supporting and you're helping them with garb and you're driving them to events and you're paying for their site fee, and then you realize that you've created a dynamic that just isn't healthy and isn't sustainable. I would, if you can, avoid making vague or targeted public posts. I would avoid making something public and creating what could be a storm that you may not kind of win on that point. I would remove yourself from the situation quietly. I would maybe send an email or a text or a phone call, just trying to sort of laterally remove yourself and just say, I need some distance. I don't think that this is good for me right now. It can be really, for those of us, I talked about this earlier in a different talk. Some of us are inherently people pleasers. We grow up in very unsafe situations and we learn to try to please people and keep the peace. And I'm unfortunately one of those people. I'm trying to recover from it. And it makes blocking people on social media really difficult, because I think, oh no, I'm going to block somebody. They're not a bad person. And I think it's the way to go. It's the way to help you can stay active in common groups and spaces if you block something, not because they're a bad person, but because that relationship with them is just toxic to you in some way, that it just gives you a bit of space. It doesn't even need to be forever. But I also think later on, if there's any issues around, if you get accused of harassment or you get accused of something and you don't feel that it's accurate, you can say, I had an issue with this person, but I blocked them on this date. And it really shows that you were proactive in terms of removing yourself. But the biggest thing, and this is what saved me in the end, is building multiple connections among different communities so that you have people you can check into for different perspectives and advice. And what I mean is, if you're this, I don't know if you can see my little mouse. If you're this green square and you find as an ally, you've identified somebody from a targeted community that you feel you can help and support, and you're kind of pouring yourself into helping and supporting them, and it all kind of goes south. I think a different way to look at it is to try to build a network of people so that if something does end up going wrong and you really need some help, you're sort of out of your depth, you have people who can kind of understand what's going on. And that's what saved me. Is I had a situation with somebody that was very negative, and I was really concerned about it blowing up online, and I had somebody from their community, from their targeted group, who I could talk to, and they said, we were wondering how long it was going to take you to cotton on that you were being used. And I was like, oh gosh. But it helped me get through it. And that's what I would really say is just try and be broad and try to make connections if you can. I realize this is a bit of a controversial term, the white party. I'm going to justify it. I hope that hope to stay with me just for a second. If not, there'll be a discussion afterwards. I want to talk about whiteness. We need to talk about it. We don't. We should. Here we go. Being white can mean providing space, especially to people of color who have experienced barriers you have not. Whether that's something as simple as their name being harder to pronounce in the Western culture that you're in, to how they look, to their family, their languages, anything like that. And you have a responsibility to understand your own privileges and use those privileges to help improve safety for others. I think being white comes with that responsibility to try, put effort into being better, learning about the barriers other people have that you might not have faced. And this is especially true if you're a peer or you're on a peerage path. But being white in the SCA can also make you feel like you're at a party that has naturally wound down. And what I mean is, there's people who I've known, let's say 15, 20 years ago in the SCA, who at that stage were like, oh, there was somebody in my family who was First Nations, but I don't know which nation and I don't know from where, but somewhere back there's like a rumor, and now fully identify as being Indigenous, even though there is no community connection whatsoever. And that's happened, I can say, with multiple people that I have known. Or people start identifying differently, and it can feel very much like there was the space and people are exiting. If you can exit it, do it, because it's not an easy space to be in. It can be really uncomfortable. And it can sometimes be like, okay, well, I'm going to stay in this space. I'm going to keep identifying as white because somebody has to be in this space to have these conversations. If no one's willing to be in this space, it's sort of, it makes it harder. It makes it harder for everyone to really talk about these things. But I would remind you that being white is not an identity. It's just an important realization. It's a step on the path towards equity. The other thing I would say is that, and I've seen this brought up in some of the other talks, it's like, am I white or am I white passing? I don't know which one applies to me. It's a spectrum like anything else. And it's not black and white. And I think that one of the big take-home lessons from a lot of these talks today is that looking at things in black and white isn't really great. Life is much more complex. Identity is more complex. So don't stop there. Like, you have your own, like, don't just be white. Have your own. Who are your ancestors? What did they do? And support others learning about theirs. And I have this picture specifically. This is an elder. Her name is Elizabeth Johnstone. And she is a master wool processor, spinner, weaver, knitter from the Shetlands. And I got to spend five days with her in October. So she's amazing in her own right. But I was talking to her about Indigenous Scotland, the Shetland Islands, and especially northwestern Scotland, which is where my ancestors are from, fits any definition of Indigenous. Like, had their land seized by England and Southern Scottish lords, had schools where their languages were beaten out of them, and then all of these things happen. And for those of us who are descended and are here, we also face the reality that our ancestors, more recent ancestors, contributed to the genocide against other people. It gets complicated. But I think connecting with your ancestors and your traditions is a hugely important part of the process of who we should all be as people. Here's my general advice. This is my general advice section for people, peers, and other humans. General advice for everyone. Allyship is consistent listening and adjustments, and working on elevating the voices that are being ignored. It's not always easy to do. And pay attention to personas and preferences. So names, we have people whose personas and are different and use different pronouns than the player. So being aware of that and keeping track of that and putting in effort there. Also being aware that what might be an academic exercise to you may hold trauma for others. So there's definitely been times you'll see this online where someone's having a conversation and it's interesting to them and other people are getting very upset. There's times where it might be academic to you, but this is really holding harm for somebody else. And just being aware of that at times. The other issue is just because a player is from a targeted community doesn't mean their persona is. Like I have a friend, Draven, who has an Irish persona. He is Cree First Nation. And I see him, there are times where I think he might be a little bit frustrated because he's trying to be an Irish persona, but everyone just asks him about the nation that he's from and his own culture, where it's like, well, yeah, but he deserves as much trade as any of us to be a person and have a persona. I think if you mess up publicly, be prepared to apologize publicly. Not easy to do. I think if you mess up, you can kind of be like, okay, I'm going to hide and I'm going to send a private message, but I think you need to step up to the plate and be prepared to talk about it publicly. And I did that today. That we did a panel at noon, and I talked about the time that I wove a swastika as a tablet weaving laurel. Swastika is very common. I should say very common symbol in Viking Age weaving, but as we learned, I think through what happened with Kaid and at Trimgate before the lockdown, that was the wrong way to look at it, and that people's safety and feeling safe is way more important than having trim look authentic. And so a few of us did a public apology on that and worked through some of the issues. So be aware of intersectionality, but also consider people as individuals. I think that just because somebody is from a certain community, don't think of them as monoliths. We're all individuals. And then gather all the facts when something happens. Sometimes things can happen very quickly on social media without all the facts. So there's grace and diplomacy in being as supportive as you can as the facts come in, and it's not an easy space. And take your cues from people directly involved. I have some specific advice to peers. We have less to lose. We have less social capital to lose than other people who are interested in being peers or who are non-peers. And sometimes we need to recognize that our voices can shut down important conversations that are being had online by being defensive. And this conversation is happening in some of the places I'm in. Don't feel the need to defend your peerage. If people really have an issue or a perception issue, and that I think that especially true of laurels, maybe also of knights. If there's issues, try and listen and be available to answer questions. Are there specific questions? Volunteer to answer specific questions. Don't feel the need to weigh in and defend. I just think it entrenches views more than they need to be. And think about whether the fact you're having peerage meetings, are they just about candidates? Or do you ever tackle other important topics? Is there room to talk about adjusting and shifting, especially in terms of inclusivity and belonging? And then are the peerage tasks accessible? For a lot of us, that question or that answer is no. And why is that? Might be true. And I reached out to members of targeted communities across the SCA for their views on what I should include in this talk. And I've included them here. I have to say that I have paraphrased or really boiled it down because there was a lot of text, and this is a PowerPoint presentation. Zaina, who is Cherokee and Blackfoot and Lakota, said, "Be welcoming and mean it. If you're welcoming to newcomers, keep that up, not just for their first event. Make sure that they are welcomed, that they're getting their feet under them, and that you're helping them find the people that are going to help sustain them in the activity. Be reliable and sustainable in your allyship." I think that's one of the things I hear from a lot of targeted members, my friends in targeted communities, is that they grow to rely on somebody and then they're not there because they've burnt out. So that idea of being sustainable by taking on what you can. Be aware many of the resources, enslaved labor, and wonders of different European periods are made possible by the plunder and destruction of the people and ecosystem of the Americas, for example, the Renaissance. Yeah. Show up to the opportunities provided by members of targeted communities that further their representation. For example, classes, podcasts, activism. If people are putting in the effort to share, show up, listen. And this was an interesting one. This may just be in Canada and not so much in America, which is don't be afraid to hold events practices on reserve land. So in Canada, in America, you have these large reservations. In Canada, we have very small reserves, and people can be reticent about connecting and connecting with the nation to hold events, to rent space for the weekend. And I really think that is an old way of thinking, and I hope people do it more. I think it creates some really interesting opportunities. Like we had a coronet. I'm part of a principality within my kingdom. We had a coronet on the fairgrounds of the Lower Similkameen First Nation, and when it came time for court, the chief of the Lower Similkameen band actually showed up. He was like, "What are you guys doing?" And we invited him. We were Prince and Princess at the time. We invited him into court. We put on some Viking regalia, and he came and sat with us in our court, and he loved it. He had no idea what was going on, but he just thought it was great. So you make fun connections, and that's really added to my play and enjoyment. And the other thing is, sometimes archery can be affected by the fact that you can have bylaws in city where you can't have archery within city limits. But if the reserve is within those limits, those provincial and municipal bylaws don't actually apply. So you can get around some of those things as a bonus. I think that's it for me. I'm going to just stop sharing. I'm wondering if anyone has any questions. Thanks everyone for watching. I hope you got something out of it. If you have any questions or comments to be made, feel free to comment below and I will try to get back to you or share resources if I can, or maybe you just have concerns. You're welcome to share those as well. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.